listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Hey everybody, welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is John Eichberger with the Fuels Institute and NACS, and I am joined by my co-host,
Paige Anderson with NACS.
And today we're going to be talking about something that everybody's talking about. We're going to talk about electric vehicle infrastructure, and there's so much going on right now with the administration trying to put together some policies to get 500,000 chargers in the market by 2030. The Congress looking at infrastructure legislation, and we want to talk a little bit about that. We want to talk about the big picture, and we are joined today by our guest, Erika Myers, who is the Acting Director of Global eMobility for the World Resources Institute. Erika, welcome back to Convenience Matters.
Thank you so much for having me again, John.
So you've been with us before, but I think this is the first time you've been a global e-mobility person for the World Resources Institute. Can you share with our audience what those big words mean and what WRI is doing? You guys are doing some great stuff. Can you explain who WRI is?
Sure. The World Resources Institute is a global think tank focused on the environmental issues of our time. So a lot of our work is focused around sustainable development, including land issues, agriculture, ocean, forest, and energy. And within that, I focus specifically on e-mobility within the context of this big global transition in our mobility space.
So clearly it is a global transition. Every time I talk to somebody, I always remind them, governments come and go. Politics, I had an election up in Canada yesterday. Did not know what the outcome was going to be when they went into it. But the global momentum on e-mobility is huge. And Paige, I'm no longer up on Capitol Hill on a regular basis. What's going on in Washington that we should bring into this conversation?
Well, clearly, President Biden, when he came in and was sworn in January, climate policy is a top priority of his administration. And one of his tenets to achieve those climate goals is the electrification of our transportation sector. And as you said in the intro, he has a goal of 500,000 EV chargers publicly accessible, getting them out there, and they have not stopped and they have not waned. Looking on Capitol Hill and the infrastructure package and even the reconciliation package, you're seeing a lot of incentives to build out EV charging and incentives for EVs themselves. So in Washington, D.C., they're not stopping. It's EVs are a go. Green light for it.
So from your guys' perspective, Erika, how are you guys viewing the developments in Washington?
This is a once-in-a-century opportunity to make transformative change in the mobility sector. So WRI is very supportive of the majority of the legislation going through and being considered right now as it relates to e-mobility investments. We in particular are very supportive of the electric school bus initiative funding that would enable and unlock billions of dollars in funds for schools to help convert their dirtiest diesel buses into clean bus alternatives for students.
Now, one of the things about that, you and I chatted about this before, is if we're going to charge these buses and make them electric and they're only being operated a couple hours a day, they have an opportunity to be distributed energy storage facilities, correct?
Absolutely. We think that the opportunity for vehicle to grid with school buses is the best use case at this point in time among all the different duty cycles.
Yeah. With the school buses, are you guys envisioning a charge at the depot type of scenario, or are these going to be buses that are going to need access to publicly available charging?
These will all be a type of for the most part, a type of fleet that would be mostly charging at their bus yards, where they, for example, already have those buses deployed from central operations perspectives, and they come back to the same place to refuel. They'll also come back to the same place to recharge. There will, however, be a need for us to consider opportunity charging for buses that are used for travel. So, for example, transporting sports teams or other applications that a school might need for longer distances. Some of that need may be met if let's say the sports example, if the school that they're going to has charging within the bus yard that fleet could have access to, that would probably solve that issue. But we do need to be thoughtful about how we are siting and building out infrastructure to accommodate these larger these larger vehicles, especially buses, which of course can range, about 60 feet long and may not fit in most public charging spaces.
Well, especially if you're looking at buses that bands use. I mean, talk about your rock star vehicles. They're pretty cool. And it's clear, the great thing about the school bus program is there's a real opportunity to test and learn with the technology. We're also seeing a similar thing with the Biden administration with federal fleets, turning them over to electric vehicles. And one of the discussions that I participated in a stakeholder meeting is the recognition that you point out, Erika, is that opportunity charging, particularly with federal fleets, particularly out in the West, where you have a lot of public lands, a lot of open space, and people are driving those vehicles. They're not going to have the opportunity to go back to the home site and recharge, and they're going to need that charging infrastructure out and about. And so looking at different industries and sectors to provide that infrastructure has got to be an important part of the discussion. And what has your experience been in looking at that siting and picking the right spots and being able to help these types of fleets?
So my experience in terms of siting personally has been fairly limited, but based on the research that I've seen and have developed, definitely thinking about all the different use cases for the infrastructure and where people would want to go to refuel is very important. Having access to restrooms, food, other things that you would want to do during those stops is incredibly important. And as well as thinking about how much it's going to cost to put that charging infrastructure there. So tapping into the existing electric grid system, having visibility on where the cheapest options are to locate equipment. So you could put in, maybe 3 megawatts of charging equipment for less money at this spot versus down the road at this spot, or even across a parking space, parking lot, like just having some visibility into where it's going to be the least expensive opportunity to put those stations will save potentially millions of dollars for taxpayers. So it is really important for us to have more transparency, a number of different ways, electrical, permitting, zoning. There's just so many different aspects of this that would be great if there's a central clearinghouse of sorts that could help speed up those investments and make them cheaper.
I'll tell you, NACS has really taken this issue extremely seriously, has invested a ton of money in research and outreach to try to facilitate the deployment of chargers. A couple of projects they funded through the Fuels Institute is looking at how many chargers do we need, where do we need them, when do we need them, what type do we need, and what use case scenarios so we can optimize the CapEx investment, looking at programs, see what kind of incentive programs are the most effective in getting this out. But the other thing we've done, we put together a calculator, and we look at what the capital expenses to install a viable DC fast charging system with this 450 kilowatt chargers or whatever have you, what the operating costs are. And most of the conversation I've heard coming out of Washington is how do we offset the investment costs, the CapEx? But the break even, the profitability motivation really comes from that operating cost. How do you balance throughput? So demand, how many charging events do you have with the demand charges the utilities need to charge in order to keep the system operational? Has there been any discussion that you're aware of that's kind of looking at how do we, from the time the station is put in operation, how do we bridge the gap between not having enough people come to charge, so we're getting just our lunch handed to us on demand charges up until the time we have enough demand so volume can offset those extra costs?
Yeah, so I've given some thought on how we can make demand charges less punitive and help support a very young industry, especially while we have very low volumes of electric vehicles. It's a situation, it's like a chicken and the egg situation, right? Is we can't get more people to invest in an electric vehicle until we have more charging infrastructure, but we can't have more charging infrastructure if we expect all of our charging station owners to take a really big hit on demand charges. So
right, exactly.
we are in the situation we have to be creative. And so a lot of discussions I've had with utilities are how can we support this young industry in an intermediate basis? And some public utility commissions, like those in California, have acknowledged this as an issue and have implemented what's called demand charge forgiveness programs. So for a very limited duration of time, where they approve utilities to rate base those demand charges and give some relief to fleet owners or charging station owners. And until we know that there will be more demand for those stations, and then they can recoup those costs for demand charges. Another way to think about it is maybe we could only charge like a little bit. So maybe instead of charging the full 100% of the demand charge, we could have a percentage of it. So maybe 25 or 50% of that demand charge is charged to the station owner, and then the remainder is rate-based or recouped in some other way. So there's certainly some ways we could work around it, but I do think that ultimately will largely depend on support from the utility regulators to approve these innovative options.
So, in looking at the future, I know that when we have looked at introducing new liquid fuels and other energy technologies into the marketplace, the convenience industry really tries to future proof. In looking at, putting in the infrastructure needed at a site for EV charging, obviously some of the technologies are changing and improving each and every day. There's so much innovation in this space. Are there things, when you've looked at the different models and scenarios, are there things that fuel retailers should be looking at that, though there may not be the demand now, but they're at a new site, they want to make sure that they would be able to install efficiently, take advantage of some of the incentives programs that are going to be out there? Are there things that they can do now, even though they may not have the demand till farther in the future?
Absolutely. So I think that there's things that, if a retailer wanted to dabble in a charging station to see exactly what the demand might be, what the value to the site might be, that you could put in temporary charging infrastructure. And you could potentially work around some of those long timelines that you would have for interconnect with the utility. So there's companies like InCharge, for example, that will provide equipment as a service, or that can help locate on-site utility power, what they call grid on a skid, which is essentially an integrated power center that will temporarily provide the level of power that you need for a fast charger, but that can be easily removed in the event that system is no longer needed. So there are ways around some of the permanency of this as retailers want to explore options. But another way to think about it as far as future-proofing is, we know that that electric vehicles are coming, right? And we know that more and more of these vehicles are having larger and larger battery sizes, and that they're being able to power at higher and higher levels. It used to be a fast charger was considered a 50 kW unit, which would be about an hour for a Tesla for today to charge fully. Now, some of the newer vehicles are charging at 150 to even there's some that bigger duty cycles, 350 kW and larger. So we know that the power demand is going to be here. That's going to be a very intense proposition as you're starting to locate multiple chargers at this level next to each other. The reality is that not all of these chargers will be utilized at any one point in time, except maybe during holiday seasons when we know that there's the majority of the travelers are on the roads. So maybe bringing in battery storage units, storing those high intensity times, could help provide that additional power that you need on demand, but don't necessarily require such a major investment.
Yeah, we've been looking at the battery-backed systems, and even there's a company out there with a propane generator-backed system as a way to overcome the demand charge hurdle. But I think, you raise the other question. The other issue is that intermittent demand in terms of when is it going to be needed, not all the time. Then you raise the next level is I was in Indiana recently at a conference, and the 4 states that hosted the event represent less than 4% of all EVs registered in the United States. And I said, you're in the audience. Chances are you may have never even seen an electric vehicle. You may still think they're this unicorn, fanciful kind of objective of the environmental community. Let me make it quite clear. They're not fanciful. They're not, just being made up. They're real. And they may not be in your market yet, but they will be. And it's that timing and the strategy of when is the right time for me to get into it. Clearly, you want to avail yourself of incentives and programs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But if you get in too early, then you're like, okay, now I'm just sitting here like a sitting duck and nobody's coming to my store. But if you get in too late, well, now your cost may be higher and maybe you're outcompeted. So it's so difficult from a retailer's perspective is, I know eventually I need to get into this, but man, I don't want to go too soon, but I don't want to go too late, but I want to get in right at the right time. And that's the biggest challenge I see right now facing the industry.
I 100% agree and sympathize with those who have been through these cycles of yesteryear where, we thought that, E85 would be the next big thing. And I know a lot of retailers made big investments there, and that didn't actually materialize in the way any of us predicted. I do think that electric vehicles are different in a lot of ways because for most drivers, the savings are real and the performance is real. And the experience is very different and very preferable to a traditional internal combustion engine. Unless, of course, you like the sound of a very loud engine. Maybe you disagree with me. But generally speaking,
I like
I personally like the quiet ride.
Well, I'm thinking I've heard the announcements of muscle cars are going to be fully electric. I think the Charger is going to be fully electric. I guarantee you they have to have a good sound system because that driver is going to want a little noise coming out that back end when they accelerate. Now, they're going to be accelerating a lot faster than they ever could in the traditional engine. But man, if you're a muscle car enthusiast and your car goes wee when you accelerate, that may not be quite what you're looking for.
No, if you are an enthusiast and you like the noise that accompanies, ramping on the accelerator, then no, then an EV may not be your thing. But for sure, for people who care about performance, I love to give people rides in my Tesla. Why? Because I think they don't really fully appreciate the amount of torque that these cars have.
Right.
And everyone I've had in there is a convert by the time they get out because they realize, oh, wow, this thing actually can move. And, it's great to have that opportunity to share that. But also for me, like the savings are real. So I've gone on 3 road trips so far this year. I just did one from DC to South Carolina a few weeks ago. And I spent less than $30 for the entire trip on charging. And if I had taken any other car, it would have been definitely triple that, possibly more. So for people who are traveling with these vehicles, they also see a real financial benefit.
We have a paper getting in peer review right now that's looking at the life cycle impact of electric vehicles and internal combustion engines and their representative fuels. And on an average, for the national average, EVs come out on top. In certain conditions and certain driving behaviors, not so much, but that's all evolving as the grid gets cleaner. On the total cost of ownership, even when you factor in replacement of the battery over the life cycle of the vehicle, they still come out on top. Lower total cost of ownership. The question that's going to be placed to consumers is, are they actually going to calculate total cost of ownership, or is that MSRP going to be the big factor? And there's so many elements that go into consumers' purchase decision that it's going to be interesting to watch because on paper, they may look like the best option. It doesn't always mean the instinctive decision of the consumer at the point of sale is going to go that route.
So the incentives could actually be even better than what we're seeing now, John, with the new infrastructure package. In addition to the $7,500 that folks had enjoyed before, the new provisions allow for up to $12,500 per car if they're made by a domestic manufacturer, and a union shop. So the price differential between the internal combustion engine and the electric alternative is going to shrink even more.
There's certainly a lot of stuff going on, and I appreciate you taking some time to join us today and bring us up to speed on your perspective and what you guys are working on. I know, Paige, you guys got a lot of work to do up on Capitol Hill. I'm just glad I don't have to go up there anymore.
I know you miss it. You miss it a lot.
Not at all.
Thanks, Erika. It's always great to hear from you. I don't know about anybody else, but I learned so much today, and it's always a great pleasure to have you here. John, it's always fun to talk EVs and fuels with you. Thanks so much for being here. Be sure to tune in next week, where we're going to have the NACS GR team to talk about what's going on with the Biden administration, Congress, and a whole host of fun issues that I know John misses very much dealing with each and every day. But thank you for listening, and please join us again on Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.